The morning sunlight spilled gently into the small apartment, painting the walls with a warm golden hue. He woke up early, as he always did, with a soft sigh and a cup of coffee in his hand. Being a single dad was never easy, but it was his life and he had learned to embrace it, with all its challenges and small joys. Today, however, felt a little different. Today he wasn't just running errands or taking his child to school. Today he was going to help out at a local community event. He dressed quickly, choosing a simple shirt and worn-out jeans, the kind that showed his long hours of work, but also the comfort of familiarity. His hair was slightly messy, and his hands bore the faint calluses of a man who worked with his hands more than most. There was a quiet pride in his movements. Even though his life wasn't perfect, he always tried to start his days with purpose. As he stepped out of his apartment building, he could hear the city waking up. The distant hum of traffic, the chatter of neighbors, the occasional bark of a dog. It all blended together into the comforting rhythm of life. He carried with him a small bag filled with cleaning supplies, ready to do his part in setting up the stage for the event. He wasn't going to perform. He wasn't even going to be in the spotlight. Today he would be behind the scenes, quietly making sure everything was ready. That was enough for him. That was what he was meant to do. The community center was already bustling when he arrived. Volunteers moved around with purpose, placing chairs, checking sound systems, and making last-minute adjustments to the decorations. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with the faint aroma of coffee and pastries, giving the space a welcoming and lively atmosphere. He nodded politely at a few familiar faces, offering smiles and brief greetings, and then got to work. The stage was small but sturdy, with a polished wooden floor that reflected the soft lights overhead. In the center of the stage sat a piano. Its surface gleamed under the overhead lights, but it seemed almost out of place, silent and still, waiting for someone to bring it to life. He glanced at it for a moment, running a finger along the edge, feeling the cool, smooth wood. He had played piano a long time ago, but that was years back. Life had moved him in different directions, and the piano had become just a memory of another time. He knelt down, dusting off the edges of the stage, moving carefully so as not to disturb the instruments and equipment that were being set up around him. His child, who had insisted on coming along today, sat nearby with a small notebook and pencil, drawing little sketches of the room and the people moving around. He smiled quietly, proud that his child was so curious and observant. There was a connection in these small moments, a bond strengthened by shared experiences even in the simplest of ways. Minutes passed and more volunteers arrived. The atmosphere grew warmer, more energetic. The stage was coming together, but so was a subtle tension in the air. The performers would be arriving soon, and the audience would begin to trickle in. He kept working, wiping down surfaces, adjusting chairs, making sure everything was just right. He didn't mind being unnoticed. In fact, he preferred it. The satisfaction of a job well done, without needing applause, was something he cherished deeply. Then, someone jokingly called out, "Hey, does anyone know how to play that piano?" The words were light-hearted, more of a casual question than a serious request, but they lingered in the air. He froze for a moment, his hand still on the rag he was using to clean. Memories of his younger days flashed through his mind. The times he had sat at a piano, fingers dancing over the keys, music flowing from his heart into the room. It had been a private joy, a secret world he had kept for himself. He hadn't played in front of anyone for years, not for an audience, not for strangers. He shook his head slightly, pretending not to hear. But the thought had taken root. What if he did? Just for a few moments, just to see. No one would expect it, and no one would know except for him. His fingers twitched involuntarily, remembering the feel of the keys beneath them. There was a quiet thrill in that memory, a reminder that he still had that part of himself alive, tucked away but waiting. The audience began to arrive, filling the seats with chatter and laughter. The room was alive, a mixture of excitement and curiosity. Some people were here to perform, others to watch, and many simply to enjoy a few hours away from their daily routines. He continued cleaning, moving carefully around the stage, but his eyes kept drifting to the piano. It seemed to call to him, a silent invitation, daring him to remember who he was beyond the roles of worker, parent, and helper. His child noticed his distraction and looked up from the notebook. "Dad, are you thinking about playing?" the child asked quietly, a mixture of curiosity and encouragement in the tone. He smiled softly, ruffling the child's hair. "Maybe," he said, though he wasn't sure even to himself. "We'll see." There was no pressure, no expectation, just a small, shared understanding. As the event continued to unfold around him, he found himself imagining what it would be like to sit at the piano, to let the music flow naturally, without concern for mistakes or judgment. His heart raced a little at the thought, and a strange mix of fear and excitement settled over him. This was more than nostalgia. It was a call to reconnect with a part of himself that had been silent for far too long. He continued working, yet every movement seemed slower, more deliberate, as if the anticipation of what might happen was weighing on him. Other volunteers passed by, chatting and laughing, unaware of the inner conversation happening in his mind. The piano remained in the center of the stage, still silent, still waiting. He ran a hand over the keys again, feeling the familiar texture, the faint coolness beneath his fingertips. It was comforting, like greeting an old friend after many years. A few more people noticed his glances and whispered among themselves, joking about the possibility of a performance. He laughed quietly, the sound soft but genuine, masking the growing excitement he felt. There was something thrilling about the unknown, about stepping outside the boundaries of his ordinary life. He had spent so many years focused on survival, on responsibilities, on doing what needed to be done. But this was different. This was a moment that could belong entirely to him. As the morning passed into early afternoon, the room filled further and the energy shifted. The performers were preparing, tuning instruments, rehearsing lines, and adjusting costumes. The audience settled into their seats, unaware that something extraordinary could happen at any moment. He continued cleaning, but the thought of playing never left him. It lingered at the edges of his mind, persistent and insistent, growing stronger with every passing minute. Finally, as he straightened the last chair and wiped down the final section of the stage, he stood back and took a deep breath. He looked at the piano, then at the audience, then back at the piano again. The moment had arrived. It wasn't planned, it wasn't expected, and it certainly wasn't announced. But it was here, and he felt a quiet, undeniable pull to take it. His child watched him, eyes wide, sensing that something significant was about to happen. He approached the piano slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the weight of anticipation in every movement. He sat down on the bench, adjusted the height slightly, and placed his hands on the keys. The familiar feel of the piano sent a shiver down his spine. It had been years, but it was still there. The connection, the memory, the music that had always been a part of him. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, took another deep breath, and prepared himself for the first note. In that quiet pause, with the room full of people unaware of what was about to happen, he realized something profound. Life had brought him here, not by chance but by small, deliberate steps. The ordinary moments, the cleaning, the preparation, the responsibility, had all led to this point. And now, for the first time in years, he would step out of the background and let something beautiful emerge. And with that thought, his fingers pressed down on the first key. The sound was soft at first, hesitant, but it was enough to break the silence. The stage, the piano, the audience all seemed to hold their breath, waiting. For him, it was more than a note. It was a return, a rediscovery, and a small act of courage that he had carried with him without realizing it. The ordinary man, the single dad who had come to clean a stage, was about to become something extraordinary. The soft sound of the first note lingered in the room, almost like a gentle invitation. He had barely pressed the key, and already, a subtle hush spread across the audience. People looked around, unsure if they had heard correctly. Some whispered to each other, and a few even leaned forward in curiosity. No one expected the man cleaning the stage to suddenly touch the piano. Yet here he was, sitting quietly on the bench, hands hovering over the keys, ready to create something unexpected. He felt a rush of nerves, the kind that tightened his chest and made his palms sweat. For a moment he wondered if he was making a mistake. Maybe he should just leave it and go back to cleaning, blending into the background as he had always done. But then he felt the familiar warmth of the piano beneath his fingers. It was reassuring, like an old friend whispering, "You can do this. You always could." The audience began to settle. Some were smiling, others still chatting quietly, curious about what was happening. He glanced at his child, who was sitting quietly in the front row, eyes wide with excitement and pride. That look reminded him why he had picked up the piano in the first place, not for fame, not for applause, but for moments like this, where music could speak louder than words. He pressed another key, this time a little stronger, letting the sound fill the room. The note resonated through the wooden stage and into the hearts of everyone present. He closed his eyes, letting memory take over. He remembered sitting at this very instrument years ago, alone in a quiet room, fingers moving over the keys while the world outside paused. Those were his happiest moments, simple and free, when he could forget his worries, his responsibilities, and just feel. As he played the next few notes, the music started to form a melody, soft, gentle, and unexpectedly beautiful. It was simple at first, almost hesitant, but each note carried a piece of his soul. He was no longer just a single dad cleaning a stage. He was a man reconnecting with himself, expressing everything he had buried under years of work, stress, and responsibility. The audience began to notice. The whispers faded into silence as they realized this was not just random tapping of keys. The melody had depth, emotion, and heart. People exchanged glances, astonished at what they were hearing. Some were leaning forward. Others had tears forming in their eyes. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that the quiet man cleaning the stage could create something so moving. He glanced at his child again. The small face, glowing with admiration, filled him with courage. Every note he played seemed to echo their bond, their shared moments at home, and the sacrifices he had made to provide and care. This music was more than just sound. It was a story, a glimpse into his life that words could never fully capture. He continued, letting his fingers move instinctively over the keys. The melody grew stronger, more confident, weaving through highs and lows like waves on a calm sea. He remembered the times he had played at home late at night when his child was asleep, and he felt lonely but hopeful. Those nights had been filled with dreams and silent promises to himself. And now, years later, those dreams were spilling out in front of a room full of people. The audience was captivated. Some held their breath, afraid to break the spell. Others had tears rolling down their cheeks, overcome by the unexpected beauty and emotion of the moment. Even the organizers, busy with their schedules and tasks, paused to watch, mesmerized by the transformation of the man they thought they knew. He was no longer just a volunteer or a helper. He had become the heartbeat of the room, a quiet force commanding attention with every note. A few people began to whisper, asking each other who he was. "I didn't know he could play like this," one said softly. Another nodded, eyes still fixed on the piano. "It's incredible. Look at him, he's pouring his whole life into it." He felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and pride. Part of him wanted to stop, worried that the audience might not like him, worried that he might make a mistake. But another part of him, the part that had always loved music, urged him to continue. It reminded him that this was not about perfection. It was about honesty, expression, and courage. He had nothing to prove except to himself, and that was enough. As he played, memories kept flooding in. He remembered teaching his child to play small melodies on a toy keyboard, the laughter and excitement that followed each little success. He remembered nights when he had felt defeated and exhausted, but still found comfort in the music. He thought about the early mornings and late nights, the sacrifices and the quiet moments of love and care. Every note he struck carried those memories, transforming them into something tangible that the audience could feel. The room seemed to breathe with him. Every chord, every pause, every gentle trill told a story. The audience didn't just hear music, they felt it. They felt the hope, the struggle, the resilience, and the quiet strength of a man who had lived life fully but humbly. He was no longer invisible. He had captured their hearts without even trying. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The sound of the piano, The subtle movement of the stage lights, the soft rustle of the audience. They all merged into a single magical experience. He lost himself in the music, forgetting the world around him, forgetting the expectations and judgments that often weighed him down. There was only the piano, the melody, and the connection with the people who were now part of this unplanned, extraordinary moment. Then, as he played a particularly heartfelt passage, he opened his eyes. He saw the audience leaning forward, eyes wide with amazement, some with tears quietly falling. He saw the organizers whispering to each other, clearly stunned. And he saw his child, face bright with pride, clapping softly in excitement. That sight, more than any applause or praise, gave him a deep sense of fulfillment. He adjusted his position slightly and allowed the music to flow more freely, letting his fingers move naturally, as if they had never stopped playing. The melody grew richer, more complex, but never forced. Every note was intentional yet effortless, carrying both skill and emotion. It was as if the piano itself recognized him, responding to the love and dedication he had carried with him all these years. A woman near the front leaned over to whisper to her friend, "He's incredible. I've never heard anything like this before." The friend nodded, wiping a tear away. It's like he's telling his life story without words. You can feel every struggle, every triumph. He noticed that the audience was no longer whispering. They were silent, fully immersed, hanging on every note. Some had closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat rigid, awestruck, completely captivated by the unexpected talent and raw emotion before them. And he, the single dad who had come to clean a stage, was at the center of it all, unsure but willing, nervous but fearless. The music reached a gentle pause, a soft moment where the room seemed to hold its collective breath. He looked down at his hands, marveling at the way they moved almost on their own, guided by instinct and memory. He smiled quietly, realizing that this was more than just a performance. This was a rediscovery, a reclaiming of a part of himself he had almost forgotten. He glanced again at his child, who was beaming with admiration. The child's small hand clutched the edge of the seat, and he could see the pride shining in those eyes. That simple connection, the unspoken understanding between them, strengthened his resolve. He would continue. He would play not for fame, not for recognition, but because it was a part of who he was, and because he wanted to share a piece of that with everyone in the room. As the melody began to build again, slightly faster now, slightly bolder, he felt a surge of confidence. He experimented with small flourishes, adding personal touches that made the music uniquely his. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in, some swaying gently in time with the rhythm. The room felt alive, charged with energy, yet filled with warmth. It was a rare kind of magic, unplanned and spontaneous, and he was at the heart of it. By the time he reached the final notes, the room was completely silent. Every person present was caught in a moment of awe, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. He let the final chord linger, a soft, resonant sound that seemed to echo through the auditorium. He lifted his hand slowly, heart pounding, unsure of what would happen next. The silence held for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. Not just polite claps, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. People rose to their feet, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The organizers rushed over, smiling broadly, shaking his hand, patting him on the back. Even strangers came forward, expressing their amazement and gratitude. He stood there quietly, feeling overwhelmed yet deeply fulfilled, realizing that an ordinary act, sitting down at a piano, had created something unforgettable. And in that moment he knew something important. Life didn't always offer a second chance, but sometimes it presented unexpected opportunities. He had been cleaning the stage, doing what he thought was a small, insignificant job. Yet that small moment had turned into a memory that no one present would forget, and it had reminded him, more than anything, that the parts of us we think are hidden often carry the greatest power. The music filled the room, echoing softly at first, then growing stronger with every passing moment. He had found his rhythm, letting his fingers move naturally over the keys, feeling the melody flow through him as if it had been waiting all these years to be played again. The audience, once unsure and curious, was now completely absorbed. Every note seemed to reach them not just through sound but through emotion, connecting them to something deeper. He glanced at his child, who sat quietly, eyes wide and sparkling, unable to hide the pride. That small, trusting look was more powerful than any applause. more meaningful than any praise. It reminded him why he had played in the first place. Because music had always been his way of speaking when words failed, his way of showing love, hope, and even sorrow. And now in front of a room full of strangers, he realized that music could reach farther than he had ever imagined. With each chord, the melody grew richer. He added small flourishes here and there, letting instinct guide him. It was no longer about technical perfection. It was about truth. Every note carried pieces of his life. The long nights of worry, the laughter he shared with his child, the quiet moments of reflection and dreams he had nurtured over the years. He could feel the energy in the room, the way the audience leaned in, holding their collective breath, waiting for each new sound. The music swelled, rising and falling like gentle waves, carrying the audience along. Some had tears in their eyes, overcome by the unexpected beauty of the performance. Others were smiling softly, mesmerized by the way this man, who they had seen merely cleaning the stage moments ago, was now telling a story without words. Every person in the room felt the honesty in his music, a story of life, struggle, hope, and love played out in melodies and harmonies. He remembered the times he had practiced at home late at night, long after his child had fallen asleep. Those quiet hours had been his escape, a place where he could express everything he felt without judgment. He remembered the frustration when he struggled with certain pieces, the joy when a difficult passage finally flowed, and the peace that followed when the music ended. All of those memories came rushing back, and with them a renewed sense of confidence. His fingers moved faster now, more assured, yet gentle. The music grew bolder yet remained tender. He experimented with new combinations of notes, letting emotion guide his hands. The audience sensed the shift. The melody was no longer just beautiful. It was alive, vibrant, almost tangible in the way it filled the room. Some people leaned forward, unable to look away. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely. Every person was experiencing it differently, yet all were equally captivated. He paused briefly, letting a chord hang in the air, the resonance lingering in the hearts of those listening. In that pause, he caught a glimpse of the organizers, whose eyes widened in surprise and admiration. They whispered to each other, clearly astonished at the transformation of the man they thought they knew. The volunteers, busy earlier with setup and decorations, had stopped what they were doing to watch. The room was alive with unspoken appreciation, a shared recognition of something rare and extraordinary unfolding before them. As the music continued, memories of his child's first attempts at learning piano surfaced. He remembered patiently guiding small hands over the keys, celebrating every success, laughing through every mistake. That connection, the bond formed over simple lessons and shared laughter, gave him a deeper sense of purpose. Every note he played now carried a piece of that love, a reflection of the bond that had shaped him as a parent and as a person. The melody shifted, moving into a section that was both joyful and wistful. He let his fingers wander, improvising slightly, drawing from a well of emotion that had been buried for years. It was thrilling and frightening at the same time. He could feel every eye in the room on him. Yet instead of feeling pressured, he felt supported by the invisible connection he had forged with the audience. They were listening, truly listening, and in response he poured everything he had into the music. The crescendo approached, and with it, a flood of emotion. He remembered the times when life had felt heavy, when responsibilities, work, and worry had weighed him down. Those struggles, once silent and private, were now expressed openly in the rise and fall of the melody. He realized that for years he had carried these emotions alone, and now, in sharing them through music, he was giving others a glimpse of his life, and in return, they were giving him their attention, empathy, and respect. The audience reacted instinctively. Some held back tears, touched by the vulnerability and authenticity of the performance. Others were smiling, caught in the beauty and surprise of the moment. Every note seemed to resonate in the hearts of those listening, drawing them into a shared experience that transcended words. They were no longer just spectators. They were participants in something deeply human, something rare and unforgettable. He noticed small gestures around the room, people leaning toward one another to share a glance, a hand over a heart, quiet nods of appreciation. Even those who had been distracted or chatting earlier were now completely focused. The music had the power to silence the chatter of daily life, to create a space where everyone present could simply feel. And in that space, he felt free, unburdened, and alive in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He continued, letting his fingers glide effortlessly, improvising and shaping the melody as it felt right in the moment. The music was no longer just a reflection of his past. It had become a conversation with the audience, a dialogue of emotions expressed through sound. He imagined their lives, their struggles and joys, and hoped that in some way his music was reaching them, comforting them, inspiring them, or simply offering a brief escape. A deep sense of connection settled over him. He realized that he wasn't performing for recognition or approval. He was playing because it was a part of him, because it had always been a part of him, waiting for the right moment to surface. And now that moment had arrived. The piano, the stage, the audience, they were no longer separate. They were all part of a shared experience, a fleeting but powerful moment in time that would stay in memory long after the notes faded. The melody softened again, moving into a gentle, reflective passage. He closed his eyes, feeling the resonance of each chord, the warmth of the audience's attention and the pride in his child's eyes. This was more than music, it was a statement of existence, a testament to resilience, love, and courage. He had stepped forward without expectation, and in doing so he had given something profoundly moving to everyone in the room. The room was silent, except for the music. Even small sounds like the gentle rustle of fabric or the faint clearing of throats seemed amplified against the backdrop of his playing. The audience's focus was complete. There was no distraction, no judgment, only shared human experience. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for applause, but for the chance to connect, to express, and to be truly seen, even if only for a few moments. The music began to build toward the final section. Each note was deliberate, full of intention and emotion. He felt a sense of exhilaration, a thrill at the realization that this simple act, sitting at a piano and letting his fingers move, could have such an impact. He thought about the years he had spent in quiet, unnoticed moments, working tirelessly, caring for his child, and fulfilling responsibilities. And now, in a few minutes, all of that history had converged into a moment of beauty and connection that no one would forget. He glanced once more at his child, who was now gripping the edge of the seat, wide-eyed and leaning forward. The child's expression was a mix of awe, pride, and joy. That small, silent acknowledgement gave him the final push he needed. Every emotion, every memory, every ounce of courage he had carried over the years flowed into the final passage. His fingers moved with confidence, grace, and freedom, creating a powerful yet tender conclusion that left the room hanging on each note. As the last chord lingered in the air, he lifted his hand slowly, letting the sound fade naturally. The silence that followed was thick, almost reverent. For a moment, no one moved, as if they were all collectively holding their breath, savoring the final resonance of the performance. Then gradually applause began, quiet at first, then growing louder, until it filled the room with cheers, claps, and whistles. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling broadly, clearly moved by the unexpected and extraordinary experience they had just witnessed. The organizers rushed forward, shaking his hand, congratulating him, praising his talent and courage. Volunteers and attendees alike approached, expressing astonishment and admiration. And yet he stood quietly, heart racing, humbled by the response. It was not about the applause, he realized. It was about the connection, the shared moment, the proof that even small, unnoticed acts could become something beautiful and unforgettable. He looked at his child, who was clapping enthusiastically, eyes shining with pride. That look, that simple expression of admiration and love was more rewarding than any recognition. In that moment, he understood something fundamental. Life's most extraordinary moments often come when you least expect them. And true courage is about stepping forward even when no one is looking. And as the audience continued to cheer, he sat quietly for a moment longer, letting the feelings sink in. He had come to clean a stage. He had stepped into an ordinary role, unnoticed and humble. And yet, in a few minutes, he had shared something profoundly human, touching hearts, inspiring emotions, and creating a memory that would linger far longer than the applause. The music had begun to settle into a deep, flowing rhythm, yet it carried a power that was undeniable. Each note he played now was more than a sound. It was a piece of himself, a reflection of everything he had lived, felt, and endured. His fingers moved with precision and feeling, and he realized in a quiet, almost magical way, that the piano had become an extension of his emotions. The stage, the lights, the audience, none of it mattered except the connection he was creating through the music. The audience sat in absolute silence, completely drawn in. Every person seemed to hold their breath, caught in the movement of the melody. Some had tears running down their faces, unable to hold back the emotion stirred by the performance. Others were leaning forward, eyes wide, captivated by the sincerity that came through every note. He noticed the way the room seemed to vibrate with energy, not loud or flashy, but quiet and profound. It was as if the music had woven an invisible thread connecting everyone present, creating a shared experience of awe and understanding. He felt the weight of the moment, but instead of fear, he felt exhilaration. The music had become more than a performance. It was a conversation with the audience, an exchange of emotion that transcended words. He let himself fully enter that conversation, pouring everything he had into the keys. Memories of his life surfaced with each chord. The struggles he had faced as a single parent, the long hours of work, the quiet moments of despair and hope. Each of those experiences gave the music its depth, making it not just beautiful but human, authentic and alive. The melody grew richer, swelling into a part of the performance that demanded attention. He improvised slightly, letting instinct and emotion guide his hands. Each movement was deliberate yet effortless, a reflection of years of practice and a lifetime of feelings. The room responded naturally. People shifted in their seats, some leaning close to friends, some closing their eyes, all drawn into the story unfolding before them. There was a sense of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. He glanced toward the back of the room, noticing a few older audience members nodding slightly, their eyes glistening with emotion. He imagined their lives, the challenges and joys they had faced, and felt a quiet satisfaction that this music could touch them, even briefly, in such a meaningful way. It was as if every note had the power to reach beyond the stage, past appearances, into the hearts of those listening. As the piece progressed, he entered a section filled with gentle, reflective chords. The music softened, almost like a whisper, carrying a sense of vulnerability and intimacy. It reminded him of nights spent at home alone, teaching his child the simple joys of life, or of the quiet moments when he had allowed himself to dream despite the weight of responsibilities. The audience sensed the shift, leaning in, hanging on each subtle note, aware that they were witnessing not just talent, but the honest expression of a life lived fully. His child watched from the front row, eyes bright and shining with pride. The small, silent encouragement gave him strength. Every note played seemed to reach out to the child, a message of love and reassurance. He realized that the music was no longer just for himself or the audience. It was a gift for the person who mattered most in his life, the one who had inspired him to persevere every day. The thought strengthened him, giving the next section of the performance a depth he hadn't anticipated. The melody shifted again, building gradually with a mix of intensity and grace. He felt a surge of courage as the music rose, carrying with it a flood of emotions. Memories of challenges, sacrifices, and hard-won victories flowed through him, transforming into something palpable that the audience could feel. Each chord echoed with the reality of a life spent balancing responsibility, love, and hope. It was raw and real, a perfect reflection of the man who had once been invisible to most, but now stood at the center of their attention. He noticed subtle reactions in the room. People leaning closer to one another, eyes glistening, small smiles appearing as hearts were touched. The music had moved beyond performance. It was now creating an atmosphere of empathy and shared humanity. The audience was no longer just watching. They were experiencing, feeling, and living through the story he was telling with his hands on the piano. He let the melody soar, rising to a crescendo that filled the room with power and emotion. The audience responded instinctively, some gasping softly, others with hands over hearts unable to contain the impact. Each note carried not just sound, but meaning, echoing the struggles, hopes, and triumphs that had defined his life. It was a moment of unspoken communication, a rare and profound connection that left everyone present in awe. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. The room held its collective breath, caught in the magic of the performance. He allowed himself to feel everything, the joy, the fear, the pride, the vulnerability, all of it transforming into music. It was an act of courage, yes, but also an act of liberation. Every note freed a part of him he had kept hidden for too long, and in doing so, he offered a gift to everyone listening. The gentle hum of the piano filled the room again as he transitioned to a slower, more reflective section. It was softer now, yet no less powerful. He played with delicacy, emphasizing emotion over speed or complexity. Every chord resonated with his life story. Each pause a quiet acknowledgement of hardships overcome and small victories celebrated. The audience was captivated, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, and all completely absorbed in the emotional depth of what they were hearing. He could feel the audience's admiration and awe, yet it was not this recognition that drove him. It was the connection, the shared understanding, and the realization that music could convey emotions words often failed to express. He had come to clean a stage, and now he had found a way to reach the hearts of dozens of people, sharing a piece of himself without speaking a single word. The crescendo returned, building with a new sense of urgency and intensity. He let his fingers move faster, more confidently, yet with control and grace. The room responded, sensing the energy and emotion rising, feeling every note vibrate with authenticity. Some audience members were leaning forward in astonishment. Others had tears quietly streaming down their faces, moved by the vulnerability and honesty of the performance. It was impossible not to be affected by the intensity and beauty of the moment. He glanced briefly at his child, who was sitting wide-eyed, holding the edge of the seat. The pride and admiration in those eyes strengthened his resolve. Every note played was a promise, a silent message of love, perseverance, and courage. He realized at this moment this music was a bridge between generations, a testament to the power of shared experience and emotional honesty. The music transitioned again, softer this time, but no less profound. He allowed his fingers to linger on certain keys, drawing out the resonance and emotion. Each note seemed to speak directly to the hearts of the audience, touching something deep and human within them. The room was fully silent except for the piano, every listener absorbed in the beauty and intensity of the performance. As he approached the final section, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The emotional journey of the piece had taken him through highs and lows, moments of quiet reflection, and waves of intensity. Yet he felt a sense of fulfillment and peace. He had shared something deeply personal and honest, and the response of the audience was a reflection of the impact of his courage and authenticity. The final notes were deliberate, slow, and filled with emotion. He pressed each key with intention, allowing the resonance to fill the room completely. The audience remained silent, caught in the beauty of the ending as if they did not want to break the magic that had been created. He let the last chord linger, fading naturally into silence, and then slowly lifted his hands from the keys. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, and whistles filled the auditorium, louder and more heartfelt than anything he had anticipated. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The organizers and volunteers rushed forward, congratulating him, shaking his hands, expressing their astonishment and admiration. Strangers approached to share their amazement, their gratitude, and their respect for the courage and talent he had shown. He looked at his child, who was clapping enthusiastically, eyes bright with pride and joy. That simple, unspoken approval meant more to him than any audience response. He had come to clean a stage, unsure of what to expect, and had found a moment that transcended performance, a moment of genuine human connection, emotion, and shared experience. As the applause continued, he realized that this performance was not just about music. It was about courage, authenticity, and the unexpected beauty that could arise when one dared to step beyond the ordinary. The music had become a bridge between him and the audience, a testament to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and the human spirit. In that moment, he understood something profound. Life often offered ordinary moments that could become extraordinary if approached with courage and heart. He had started the day cleaning a stage, unsure of what would happen, and ended it creating a memory that would live in the hearts of everyone present for years to come. And as he stood there, absorbing the applause, he felt a quiet, deep sense of fulfillment. The piano, the audience, and the shared experience had reminded him of something essential. Sometimes, the most remarkable moments in life arrive unexpectedly, and even the smallest act of courage can leave a lasting impression. The applause had finally settled, leaving a warm, buzzing energy in the room. People were still talking, their voices full of excitement and awe, but now the atmosphere carried a different kind of energy, a shared understanding that something remarkable had just happened. He sat back on the piano bench for a moment, hands still hovering over the keys, feeling the echo of the music lingering in the room and in his heart. It was one thing to play, but it was another to witness how music could touch people so deeply. The audience continued to rise, clapping and cheering, some leaning toward him with wide smiles, others whispering quietly to friends about how unexpected and moving the performance had been. Strangers approached, patting his back or shaking his hand, expressing admiration and gratitude. It was overwhelming, yet he felt a sense of calm beneath the excitement. This wasn't about praise or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing a piece of himself in a way that words could never fully express. He looked down at his child, who was clapping enthusiastically, eyes shining with pride. That look alone, that small affirmation, meant more than anything else in the room. The child ran up to him and wrapped tiny arms around his waist, a simple gesture that carried more love and admiration than any words could convey. In that moment, he realized that the performance had not only touched the hearts of strangers, but had strengthened the bond between him and his child in a way that would last forever. The organizers approached, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. They asked if he would consider performing at future events, explaining how his unexpected talent had completely captivated the audience. He smiled, feeling humbled. He had never sought recognition, never aimed to perform publicly, yet the impact of this moment was undeniable. It was a reminder that sometimes life offered opportunities when least expected, and courage, simply stepping forward, could change everything. Volunteers and attendees came forward to share their thoughts. Some said they had been moved to tears. Others shared how the music had reminded them of their own experiences, struggles, and joys. He listened quietly, absorbing their words but feeling an even deeper personal lesson take shape within him. Music, or any form of genuine expression, had the power to bridge gaps, to create understanding and to inspire emotion. He had touched hearts without intending to, simply by allowing himself to be authentic. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the room quieted again, leaving a soft echo of conversation and the faint hum of the piano. He took a moment to sit alone on the bench, reflecting on what had just happened. Cleaning the stage, a simple, ordinary task, had led to this extraordinary moment. He thought about all the small, unnoticed parts of his life, the long hours, the sacrifices, the moments of quiet responsibility, and realized that even these ordinary actions had value, sometimes more than one could imagine. He thought about his child and the life lessons he had hoped to teach: courage, perseverance, and the importance of expressing oneself honestly. Today he had demonstrated all of those lessons, not through words but through action and music. It was a reminder that teaching and inspiring often happened in small, subtle ways, and that sometimes the most profound lessons were learned not in classrooms or speeches, but in moments of genuine experience. The piano, still gleaming under the soft lights, seemed to hum with life, as if acknowledging the journey they had shared. He ran his fingers over the keys one last time, not to play but to feel the connection that had been created. It was more than just a performance. It was a moment of vulnerability, courage, and authenticity that had touched everyone present, including himself. He realized that this experience would stay with him forever, a memory of what was possible when one dared to step beyond the ordinary. He reflected on the people he had seen in the audience, the expressions of awe, the tears, the quiet smiles. Each person had brought their own experiences and emotions to the room, and in turn they had been affected by the music. It was a reminder of the shared humanity that connected everyone, regardless of background or circumstance. Moments like this, rare and unplanned, revealed the invisible threads that tied people together, showing that art, courage, and sincerity could break barriers and touch lives deeply. His thoughts wandered to the future. He realized that he would never forget this day, the feelings it had stirred or the lessons it had imparted. Perhaps he would perform again someday, maybe at another community event, maybe for his child alone, or maybe even for strangers who needed to hear the story his music could tell. But beyond performance, he understood something more important: the courage to embrace a moment, To step forward despite fear or doubt could create ripples far beyond what one could imagine. He also considered the ordinary moments that had led him here. Cleaning the stage, preparing quietly behind the scenes, fulfilling responsibilities, caring for his child. All of these actions had created the circumstances for something extraordinary to emerge. It was a powerful reminder that life's small, unnoticed efforts often mattered more than one realized. They were the foundation upon which extraordinary moments could be built, waiting for courage and opportunity to awaken them. As the last audience members left, he and his child packed up their belongings. The air was filled with a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond applause or recognition. Walking out of the auditorium together hand in hand, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life would continue with its usual responsibilities and challenges, but now he carried the knowledge that ordinary moments could hold extraordinary potential, and that courage, even in small doses, could transform life in unexpected ways. That evening at home, he reflected further. The piano had returned to silence, yet the music remained alive in his memory. He thought about how he could carry this feeling forward, integrating it into his daily life. He realized that authenticity, vulnerability, and courage were not just reserved for grand performances. They could be expressed in every aspect of life. In the way one treated others, in the way one approached challenges, and in the way one shared love and hope with those around them. He thought about his child again and the example he had set. Today had shown that stepping forward, embracing a moment, and sharing one's true self could have a profound impact. He hoped that his child would remember this lesson, carrying it into their own life, understanding that courage and authenticity were qualities that could transform ordinary moments into memories and experiences that lasted forever. He also reflected on the audience, the strangers whose lives he had touched without knowing them. It was humbling to realize that a single act, born out of authenticity and courage, could resonate so deeply. The applause, the smiles, the tears, they were not just reactions to music, but responses to the honesty and humanity he had shared. It reminded him that even small gestures, when offered sincerely, could create ripples far beyond what one could imagine. Later, sitting quietly in his living room, he realized that this experience had changed him in subtle but profound ways. He felt a renewed sense of confidence, not in his abilities alone, but in the idea that life offered unexpected opportunities to connect, inspire, and create meaning. He understood that even in ordinary routines, work, parenting, chores, moments of extraordinary possibility could emerge, waiting for courage, creativity, and authenticity to bring them to life. He thought back to the first note he had played, the moment when he had hesitated, unsure if he should continue. That hesitation, that uncertainty, had transformed into something far greater than he could have anticipated. It had reminded him that fear was not an obstacle, but a signal that one was about to step into something meaningful, something that mattered not only to oneself but to others. As night fell, he looked at his child sleeping peacefully, feeling a sense of profound gratitude. Today had been more than a performance, it had been a revelation, a reminder of what life could offer when one dared to embrace it fully. The ordinary man who had simply come to clean a stage had become a source of inspiration, joy, and connection, leaving a mark not only on the audience but on his own heart. He knew that life would continue with its challenges and responsibilities, but now he carried something invaluable, a reminder that courage, authenticity, and love could transform ordinary moments into extraordinary experiences. He had learned that stepping forward, even when uncertain, could create lasting memories, strengthen bonds, and touch lives in ways that were impossible to predict. And in that quiet, reflective moment, he understood a truth that would stay with him forever. Life's most meaningful moments often came unexpectedly, and even a single person acting with honesty and courage could create ripples that reached far beyond themselves. He had come to clean a stage and left it forever changed, just as he had changed, carrying with him a memory, a lesson, and a feeling that would inspire him for the rest of his life.